to our Cricut beginner series. This is week 3, and this week we're covering the second part of our Cricut Design Space overview. Last week we talked about the basic editing features of Cricut Design Space and what you can do on the tablet versus what you can do on the desktop. And this week we're going to dive specifically into the layers feature and how you can edit your individual layers in a little bit more of an advanced way. So without further ado, let's jump right in.
Okay, we are back in Cricut Design Space, and this time we're going to look into a few more advanced editing features and talk about the layers of our design and how we can edit those individually to get more of a custom look and have some useful features to make our cutting and application of our design a lot easier on the back end. So I've imported this design. This is an SVG I created. If you like it, it's in my Etsy shop, but we're just going to use it to work with because it's really easy to show some of the features that we're talking about here because it's got 3 layers and they're all different. So first I want to draw your attention just to the layers panel over here on the right. This is the only panel we haven't talked about yet. And again, if you missed the beginning of this video, there is a Cricut Design Space video 1 over on my channel where we talk about all of the editing features here on the left-hand side and along the top of our menu. And those are kind of your more beginner level things in Cricut Design Space. So head over and watch that video first if you're unfamiliar with it. But now we're going to dive into this panel over here on the right and talk about the rest of our editing features. So first, I want to talk about the group and ungroup buttons up here at the top. I could click on World Traveler and then hold down the Shift key and click on the banner. I could group those together and this will just create a cutting group. It doesn't really functionally do anything different about how the Cricut is going to cut out my design. It's still going to cut them out separately because they're separate colors. But if you were working with an SVG that had many layers and you had to position them on top of each other in different orders, it's sometimes useful to group things just so you can move them together. So now if I go to move this somewhere else on my design, it's stuck together. I don't have to worry about realigning these every single time I move them. I'm gonna click undo though, because I actually don't want these to be in a group right now, but just know that that's how you could do that. I could have also just then, if I had them grouped, I could also then just click ungroup to undo that instead of hitting undo, but that's kind of 2 ways to do the same thing. Another thing that I want to draw your attention to is that I just used the sidebar menu over here to do that selection, but I could also just click on the actual image and it would achieve the same result. That's group and ungroup. Duplicate does exactly what you think. I can click on one layer at a time and duplicate that layer and it would give me another one of it. Or I can click on as many layers at a time as I want and click duplicate, and Cricut Design Space will duplicate them all together. And it keeps them all kind of merged for that editing, and then they're separate after that. So that's a good way if you have to create multiple of, like, if I was putting this on a shirt and I needed to make 2 or 3 shirts, I could just select the whole thing either by clicking and dragging, shift clicking each layer, or shift clicking each layer over here and just clicking duplicate, and this would tell Cricut that I want to make 2 of this entire design. And then the delete key does exactly what the delete key on your keyboard does. It would delete that layer. The next thing I want to talk about is color sync. Color sync would be useful, like, let's go ahead and duplicate this just so I can show you for example purposes. But let's say like I had imported this design and this was just a different color scheme entirely, or let's just keep this purple. But I knew that I actually wanted both of these shirts to be with the blue Epcot ball in the background. I can actually click on the color that I want to use and then click color sync, and then this is going to show me all the different colors that Cricut thinks I am planning to cut on. And it's also kind of giving you a preview of how many mats you're going to need to use for this project. In other words, I would do a mat of blue vinyl, and then I would unload that from my Cricut and load in red vinyl, and it would cut the 2 banners. And then I would unload that and load in white vinyl, and it would cut the letters. And then there's this purple one at the end. But what if I didn't want to do purple and I wanted to do blue? Instead of having to click on the Epcot ball and change the cut in this section over here that we talked about last time, which can sometimes be confusing if you're dealing with different shades of a color and can't get that exact color correct, and you really want Cricut to know, no, I want these to be the exact same color, I could just click on the Epcot ball here and drag it up to the blue section, and I'm telling Cricut that I only want to use 3 colors and those are the 3 colors I want to use. So color sync is really cool for doing that, and it's a great feature to use to save some time on your projects there. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this one Epcot ball because we don't need it. We're just dealing with this one. I'm going to move it to the center, and let's talk about some more editing features. So the next thing I want to talk to you about is the visibility. Just note that if I didn't want to cut the World Traveler letters, but I didn't necessarily want to delete it from my design entirely, I can just toggle the visibility on that layer here. And I'm telling Cricut that I really don't want to cut that. I just want to cut these two things on my project, but I don't necessarily want to delete it from my canvas. So that's just a good way to get rid of something that you don't need to cut at that given time, but not delete it entirely. I can also click blank canvas here at the bottom, and it opens up some simple editing for your canvas in general. Like maybe I wasn't sure about these colors, but I know this is going to go on a light pink shirt. So I could click on light pink here, and I could just kind of get a visualization for what this is going to look like on that project. I'm going to click, didn't mean to do that, sorry. I'm going to click that again and go back to white though, because that's a little bit distracting, but that's just good to know that that's there. And now let's talk about a few more advanced features down here at the bottom. We're going to talk about slice, weld, attach, flatten, and contour. So first let's talk about slice. I like to explain slice like it's a cookie cutter. Slice is, for example, let's look at this design we have here on the screen. So we have our Epcot ball, and you can see there's a lot of action going on behind the banner, but obviously I'm going to be putting this banner over it. So I don't need any of these cuts that are going to be underneath the banner because they're never going to be visible. So instead of having the Cricut cut those out and me having to weed them, I just want to get rid of them. I want everything behind the banner to be gone. So I'm going to use the banner to work as a cookie cutter. So first we're going to copy or duplicate our banner here, because we definitely want to keep one aside that looks right. And then we're going to turn this one into a cookie cutter. So I'm going to select the banner, and then I'm going to select the Epcot ball, and I'm going to click slice. And you're going to see it's going to create some slice results once it's finishing what it's doing. And we're just going to move those off to the side. But you can see it just punched through the design. So usually you want to get rid of your slice results because I don't have any need for these, which is why I sliced them out in the first place. So I'm going to delete all of those slice results. And you can see once I do that, I'm left with the Epcot ball minus all the parts that are going to be behind my banner. And then you can just line it back up, and you have a perfect cut without all of those extra cuts that you don't need anymore. Just remember that when you do that, those new slice results are now the top layer. So you might have to do some rearranging of your layers so that everything looks right again. So I'm going to take my text and just drag it up to the top so it's the top layer again. And that's the slice feature. To talk about weld and attach, I'm actually going to use a different design. So I'm just going to take this whole thing and delete it. And I'm going to pull in another SVG. This one's a little more complicated. This is a little Valentine's Day design I created. I'm going to quickly just ungroup everything here. And I'm going to change some colors so that we've got something more interesting here to work with. Okay, let's talk about weld first. Weld is often used for text, but honestly, weld and attach are essentially the same thing. All it's doing really is telling your Cricut that you want to keep these in the same relative space. So that doesn't probably make a lot of sense. Let me show you what I mean. Obviously, I want to cut out you've and got and male together. I don't want to have to cut out, you can see in the panel over here of my layers, it's going to cut out each letter individually. And if I click make it, let me make this a little bit smaller here. If I click make it, you're going to see that Cricut thinks it wants to cut each letter individually. So here's a bunch of the letters here. And then I would have to piece those back together after I cut, which obviously I don't want to do. So instead of doing that, I'm going to select the layers for each word. So I'm going to select all of the letters for you've by clicking on it because it's already grouped, or I could shift click each letter individually that I want to weld, and then I can click weld and it will connect them together so that when I click make it now, you can see that it's cutting out you've together. So I don't have to recreate it or re-splice it back together after cutting. And attach essentially does the same thing. I often use attach for things that aren't close by on the canvas. Maybe I don't want to have to get the spacing right on you've got male. I really want to make sure that the space between you've got and male stays exactly how it is here. So I might click on got male, shift click on you've, and click attach. And this is gonna tell Cricut that when I cut it out, I want those to stay exactly in that relative space so that I don't have to recreate it or eyeball it again after cutting. So if I go to the pink mat here, you can see it looks exactly like it did on my canvas, and I'm not gonna have to recreate that later. On this particular design, you can see that the hearts would be another good place to do that feature so that I don't have to recreate where those are in relative space. Note that when you attach things, they're automatically moved to the top layer. So you may have to slide those back down if you don't want to see them as the top layer anymore. I'm gonna move those back to the bottom here so that it makes a little more sense. And then you can see that when I click make it, I'm not having to worry about recreating the space between those hearts again. It's already exactly how I want it to look. So that's Weld and Attach. Flatten is a tool that's specifically for print then cut. So because I have a lot of shapes here and a lot of layers, Flatten would be if I wanted this to be a print then cut design and I wanted Cricut to know that I want to print out this whole thing together and then have Cricut simply cut around the outline of my design. I would select this whole thing and select Flatten, and it would convert it to a print then cut project that prints this whole thing all together, or in other words, flattened down to one flat image. Just note that when you do this, it's irreversible. So do this with care and only when you really want to do it. And that is Flatten. The last one we have to talk about is Contour. And to talk about Contour, I'm going to get something new here for us to work with. Contour is going to allow us to turn off and on different cut sections for an element that's all one piece. Let's say I didn't want this middle section, the Agilist. I could hit Contour, and right now everything is turned on to be cut. But if I don't want it to cut Agilist, I can simply click on those sections of my design, and as long as they're not touching anything else, as long as they're their own little section of the design, Cricut can actually turn those parts off, which allows you to not cut that section. So if you're working with an image you found online and you want to delete a certain section of it, as long as it's identifiable as its own section of the design, you can use Contour to turn the cuts off for that section. So that's Contour. Just a couple last things on Cricut Design Space before we finish up. I do want to draw to your attention that there are grid measurements here along your canvas, which allows you to kind of eyeball the size of things if you don't want to use the sizing that's here or the sizing that's here. But it allows you just to kind of look and see where you are in relative space. And also there is a zoom in, zoom out button. It's just grayed out down here. You can use the plus sign, or you can just zoom in and out on your trackpad. But yeah, those are all of your editing features in Cricut Design Space in just 2 videos.
And that pretty much covers Cricut Design Space. So that's all the different editing features you can do to your individual layers. And don't forget, last week we talked about all the basic editing features of Cricut Design Space as well. So if you missed that video, don't forget to head over to my channel and check that one out. Next week, we're continuing on with our Cricut Beginner series, and we're going to talk about all the different supplies and materials you might want to get as you're getting started with Cricut to make sure you're all set to go with your beginner projects. We're even going to talk about the different SVG files and supplies we're going to use for our first 2 beginner projects that we're doing as part of this series. So tune in next week, and we're going to go over all the different things you're going to want to have or maybe save up to invest in so that you can really get the most out of your new Cricut machine. See you there!